Today's reading, Genesis chapter 32. So many interpretations, so much insight, so many different ways we can go with this. So let's give you the context. We have Jacob, who is the son of Isaac, who's the son of Abraham. So he's the inheritor of the covenant promise that God made with Abraham to make his descendants as many as the stars in the sky. Now Jacob is not a straightforward character at all. Jacob has cheated his brother Esau out of his birthright and out of his inheritance. He went into Isaac on his deathbed and received Isaac's blessing, which was due to the firstborn, which was due to Esau. And now he's gone into hiding, and he's terrified of Esau, and rightly so, because Esau is a fierce man. He's a hunter, and he's got 400 men with him marching to meet Jacob on the eve of this strange wrestling with God. So what happens? Well, we're told in Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 to 32, that Jacob meets this mysterious character, widely recognized as God. The important part of this story, God wrestles with Jacob. So there's a sense that this is a kind of an equal contest, like a scrum in rugby. Both sides are pushing against one another. So Jacob wrestles all night, we're told in Genesis chapter 32. God allows Jacob to wrestle with him, to contend with him, to strive with him, because he's trying to make Jacob into someone who's worthy to be called Israel, be the people who will connect God to his people. We heard in yesterday's reading Jacob's ladder, where angels were ascending and descending from earth to heaven. So Israel, to a certain extent, is that connection. Those people, they are the people that God has chosen to be the connection between heaven and the people on earth. But Jacob has proven to be someone who possibly is not ready for that role or that responsibility. So what does God do? God doesn't smite him. Like a loving father, he comes in the form of this angelic figure and he wrestles with Jacob. And as we know, a wrestling match, like going to the gym or doing any training, it should strengthen your muscles to prepare him to be a worthy inheritor of this covenantal promise that he made with Abraham. Now, he doesn't leave Jacob unscathed. Jacob receives a wound to the hip. And what is God telling us here? Jacob is given this wound almost as a reminder that he needs to remain humble. He needs to keep his eyes on the prize. Jordan Peterson, the Canadian psychologist, actually has some very interesting theories on this. And he noticed that even in rats, if a larger rat fought against a smaller rat, unless the larger rat, when they were play fighting, allowed the smaller rat to win something like 30% of the time, the smaller rat wouldn't play anymore. He wouldn't engage in the game. Now, I think this is very, very interesting when we look at this story. Because God being God, omniscient, omnipotent and omnipresent, he could easily overpower us and create machines that just automatically followed his will and never committed any sins or strayed off track. But he allows us to contend with him. He gives us free will. He allows us to wrestle with him, to make the right choices, to make mistakes, to actively have a stake in the game. And by allowing Jacob to wrestle with him, by allowing the people Israel to wrestle with him, like the smaller rat and the larger rat, the smaller rat engages with the game. Israel engages with the game. Okay, it's going to be difficult. You're going to get wounded. You're going to get injured along the way. You're going to, in certain cases, limp through certain periods of your life. But you can contend with me. You can strive with me. You can engage in the game. And by engaging in the game, this is where the growth, this is where the benediction, the blessing is to be found. By engaging in this wrestling process with God. It reminds me of the Canaanite woman in Matthew 15. She wouldn't take no for an answer. Even the dogs will eat the scraps that fall from the master's table. She wasn't leaving until she got blessed. God wants us to wrestle with him. He wants us to actively engage with him. This is where our free will comes in. And through that choice we make for God, That's when we become emboldened, or we become stronger, like Jacob wrestling. He came out of that battle injured, but he was fortified, and he was able to grow from this experience that he had with God, and he was able to carry on this journey, this covenantal promise that was made. He was a more worthy inheritor of that promise. St. Augustine has an interesting viewpoint on this also. Now, he said Jacob's withered thigh stands for bad Christians, in his words, so that we find in him both blessing and limping. He is blessed with respect to those who live good lives. He limps with respect to those who live bad lives. We have those who limp their way through, and we have those who walk more freely on the path to salvation. But both are found within the body of the church. Interesting. I particularly like St. Thomas Aquinas' commentary on the Gospel of John, where it is better to limp along the way than to walk briskly off the way. So that's a very, very clever way of putting it. For one who limps on the way, even though he makes just a little progress, is approaching his destination, okay, heaven. But if one walks off the way, the faster he goes, the further he gets from his destination. Through their suffering, unite their suffering to the cross of Christ. Their limping forward is going forward in the right direction. Not, those who are athletic and sprinting off in the opposite direction. They may look as though they have everything in life, but they're ultimately moving in the wrong direction, no matter how freely and how physically able they are. Job is the one who was inflicted with the most terrible series of events that could ever happen to any noble or righteous person. He loses his family, he loses his wealth. He sits on a dung heap, scraping his sores with a broken piece of shard of glass. God was allowing the devil to inflict a wound, like on Jacob. But Job wrestled with God through the most terrible situation. And in the end, he was blessed with double the wealth and prosperity than he had initially. This story of Jacob wrestling with God is like a blueprint for the Christian life. God wants us to engage in the struggle. He wants us to strive with him. He gives us free will to choose for God or choose against God. We can limp, as Aquinas says, in the right direction, however slowly, or we can sprint off in the opposite direction from the destination. And through that wrestling, through that striving, we become worthy inheritors of that covenantal promise that God made to Abraham